the members of the judiciary, the Chief Registrar, the Director of Public Prosecutions, not forgetting, of course, the Solicitor General, and invited guests, our wonderful panelists, members of the legal fraternity, ladies and gentlemen, Dolavina, and a very good afternoon to you all. A number of reasons why we have various topics at the AG's conference is to essentially get people to think about new areas of the law, or at times existing areas of the law that can actually be improved upon. It also provides a forum and opportunity for those of you in particular in private practice, or even, for example, organizations like Legal Aid and various other statutory bodies, to realize that there's a whole plethora of new work that's coming along your way. Society is changing. We are catching up with the digital age. In many respects, we are way behind in certain areas. Some areas we are doing well in terms of catching up. And of course, the sort of traditional notions of what falls within the civil sphere as opposed to the criminal sphere. There, of course, now we have criminal culpability arising from civil matters. You know, whether you're talking about fiduciary duty of directors in companies law, or various other areas where you have civil actions, but that can actually give rise to criminal culpability. So the whole idea is to get you to think along those. Sometimes I think I've sort of seen the reaction of some people. They think it's perhaps all too esoteric, but in fact it is not. In countries like, for example, Singapore, they have stayed ahead of the ball game is because their ability to look into the future and to anticipate what could actually be coming. And in our case, because of the situation that we are in, we have the benefit, if you like, of learning from many other jurisdictions because they've actually gone and tried it. And as has been noted in the, excuse me, in the strata title session, that there are many mistakes, for example, jurisdictions like Australia, and we can very quickly ensure that we actually don't adopt those mistakes and ensure that we engineer our laws to ensure that we actually are able to escape that. I very quickly just wanted to summarize, as I normally do, at the end of the conference, to perhaps not recap necessarily what the sessions were about, but also to be able to highlight some of the areas that government may be working on, or the Attorney General's office would be working on, and perhaps some of the things that you can actually contribute towards too. As highlighted, for example, regarding strata title, the rate of home ownership in Fiji is extremely low. In the question session, as I said, that most young people in Fiji don't own their own homes. When you have a population base where 50% of the Fijian population today is below the age of 27, 70% of the population is below the age of 40, which is predominantly most of you. People like myself and those of you over the age of 40, you're in the minority. And now, majority is, of course, below the age of 40. It has enormous implications in terms of their empowerment, in terms of their ability to access assets, be able to build a strong economic base. Because one of the, of course, effects of having a strong population, below the age of 40, 70%, very soon they'll also get old too. So the graph then actually gets skewed again. So what are we doing in terms of building those building blocks, putting together to be able to ensure that you actually have a dignified old age? And one of the key aspects of having or living with dignity is, of course, owning your own home, at the very least one. So we are not doing well in that space. So how do we actually get people to think outside the box? How do we make it inexpensive? And how do we make it actually accessible and indeed, of course, as I highlighted, affordable? And create the desire in people to actually own their own homes. So I think that requires, of course, us to do lots of things. We're partnering with IFC, etc. But it also requires us as lawyers to think about the ramifications of these new ideas. As I highlighted the other day, if you're going to have strata title, if you'll have shared verandas and balconies and what have you, and you actually have the possessory and indeed the proprietary rights over your individual unit, and assuming you've got 5 units on one floor, then if we are used to sitting out in the veranda in your home at the moment and drinking yangona, can you do that in a common shared veranda? One would argue and say no. Can you hang up your clothes anywhere? One would say no. So where do you do that? As we've seen in Australia, for example, we have the body corporates where the people living in a particular building, they get elected, and then they choose, their leader, so to speak, and they run the affairs of the strata title building. Are we mature enough to do that, or do we have the level of sophistication, the area of strata titling? We don't actually have a market as such. Yes, there is strata title in Fiji, as Mr. Patel highlighted, but they're all high-end strata title. You know, you have your Radissons, you have your Hiltons. These are very cashed up, either Fijians or foreigners who actually own these strata titles. But not your everyday Fijians actually own these strata titles. And most of the strata titles in Fiji currently are bought by individuals, but they actually work in a hotel environment. So if you, for example, own a strata title at the Radisson, there are many individuals who own rooms at the Radisson, but they probably stay there once a year. The rest of the time, they have an agreement with the Radisson management group and they rent out your room, so to speak, as part of the hotel setup. So, the B&B concept. I'm sure that if once more people start owning strata titling, they might get into B&B itself. And they might move back to the squatter area. Actually, I just was told just 2 days ago of a person who's recently been widowed. And so she was looking for a flat for herself. And she eventually found a flat, or upstairs portion of a house, for rent purposes. But the only reason she came across it because she sort of was related to these people who owned it. But for them, the upstairs was their holiday home. That's where they went for Christmas, or any sort of major 3-4 day holiday, have a bit of drinking party, etc. Downstairs was rented out. Guess where their permanent domicile was? Watuanga squatter area. And they had a few other buildings there within the squatter area. So it requires all of us to have a complete mind change, a mindset change, in respect of how do we deal with new issues. In particular, if you want to empower people in one particular asset or facet, then what are the consequential legal requirements for that? And of course, as lawyers, there'll be very interesting issues for you to be able to, advise your clients on. And again, there's a lot of issues, as we learned from the Australian experience, building standards, building codes, regulations around that. Very little regulations around that. Those of you in private practice, once you start bringing in these regulations, you need to advise your clients. Today in Fiji, at this point in time, realistically, if these two ladies and I decide to set up a building construction company, we can go and do it. There's absolutely nothing technically stopping us from setting up a construction company. As long as we have a bit of funds and have can hire some more other people, we set up a construction company. So we need to, again, bring in new laws, new parameters of governance to ensure that we're able to work well in this area. I think the other point that I wanted to make was perhaps the need for some statutory requirements to replace body corporates where people are elected until such time as we get perhaps the economies of scale or large a strata title development and people get used to the idea, then you can pass that on to them so individual body corporates can work within that. The Unit Title Act, as Mr. Patel highlighted, he talked about some of the areas that perhaps may be a bit scant or a bit not as flashy as it's supposed to be. We're going through that. The IFC is working with us on that. There may be a need to completely repeal that act and put in place a new act altogether that's a lot more modern, because as you know, repealing acts, every second clause is a lot more problematic than to actually put in place a new law in its place too. So you should be keeping an eye out for that too. And again, those of you who may be advising insurance companies, the problems of products, I should say, are the products available in the Fijian market for individualized strata titling? And that's, again, an area that we need to develop and, of course, contribute to. And in fact, we look forward to your contributions because there will be widespread public consultations in this respect, as we're having widespread public consultations regarding the climate change bill. And I hope many of you have contributed to that. You can go online because there are a number of significant areas proposed in this bill that also affects businesses also, affects how you do your business also. Ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, mediation, of course, is anathema. Most people, lawyers regard as anathema to the legal profession. I know one of the one of the presenters or panelists said that, you should advise your client, go for mediation, don't go for litigation. And I know some lawyers who would never do that, because for them, litigation is the way to go. And in fact, to be frank with you, some lawyers see litigation as a means of probably, racking up the billing hours. But the analogy I'd like to use is that if you are able to bring down that bill for your client and give them good quality and service and be able to find a resolution to the particular dispute they may have, then of course you have a satisfied client and you get a return client. The example that I used many years ago was that a few years ago, if you walk down the street in Nandi town, if you walked in many of those shops, you'll see, I remember there's a live example, or a real example. I saw a Buller shirt which I really liked. It was $69. And I walked in and I asked the shopkeeper and he said, for you, $20. Then another fellow Fijian walked in. He was not the Attorney General or Minister or some official, and he said, $25 for you. So I said to him, why are you charging us $25? You're still making money from us. I know you're not going to give it to us below cost, but you got $69. He said, that's the tourist price. That's the tourist price. So certain lawyers charge tourist prices also, depending on how deep they believe their client's pocket is. But what I did say to him was, if you charged him $25, the tourist probably buy 3 or 4 pieces. Whenever I travel overseas, because chocolate is not inexpensive, I tend to buy chocolates for everybody. My wife's family, my family, extended family, everybody else, because it's cheap. So in the same way, if Buller shirt is a novelty and it's a reasonable price, people buy more. In the same way, you may actually be creating work for yourself by treating your clients well, getting a resolution to that very quickly. I had a story when I used to work for Minter Allison. I remember I was, for about 6 months, I was part of the division in litigation. And there was one very wealthy gentleman, without revealing too much. He had a very well-known business. And he was suing one of his former employees. And he had worked for him about 35 years. And he decided to sue him because his employee went and set up a business very similar to his former employer. And I remember a corner of that room was full of discovery documents, right up to the ceiling. Millions of dollars had already been spent. One of the lawyers, and we represented the insurance company for the client, one of the lawyers had a bright idea, probably way ahead of his time, and he walked into the room. Everybody's decked up with their lawyers on the other side of the table and me on this side. And he asked we used to call him the old man because he was the sort of kind of father figure in the room. He asked the old man, he said, why are you suing him? What do you really want? What do you really want? He said, I want him to say sorry to me because I treated him like a son. He was with me for 35 years and he just walked away from me and set up a business. If he says sorry to me, that's it. They did. They hugged and cried. No litigation. So sometimes, the point being that sometimes when people have disputes, there's something other than what they're saying is the dispute. And your ability as a lawyer, as an arbitrator, as a mediator, to know exactly what nerve to press to get a resolution would be your skill set. And indeed, as a lawyer, this one's something that you should also be able to be attuned to. We, of course, as you know, our High Commissioner, who is also a former lawyer, Luke Danivalu, signed the Singapore Convention on our behalf when it was held. I think it was on August the 7th from memory. He signed that. And of course, I would like to say to you, Mr. Lim, we want to be the 3rd country to do the ratification together with you in Brunei. And our plan is that we intend to, under our laws, if we sign an international convention, it has to be approved by Parliament. We intend to bring it to Parliament's, to table it in Parliament in the February session. And again, as provided for, that within 30 days, the committee must come back And then by March, we should be able to ratify it once Parliament is completed. So please don't let Samoa in. We want to be there. We want to be there with Brunei and Singapore. We also have discussed, and you may have heard us say this before, and the Solicitor General has had some very good meetings with Mr. Lim about it, and we intend to set up what we would at this preliminary stage call the Pacific International Mediation and Arbitration Center in Nandi, because we see there's a lot of opportunity for Fiji to become not in competition with Singapore, but of course as an ancillary to the services that Singapore does provide within our own right, because there's a lot of work being done in the Pacific now with a lot of, for example, the Australians have now offered $1.5 billion for infrastructure development by way of soft loans and $500 million by way of grants, and we assume there'll be a heightening of infrastructure development. And of course, private contractors would be involved. Invariably, you may get some disputes, and hopefully we can resolve those at the center that we'll set up in Nandi, and we look forward to the cooperation and assistance from Singapore. We also recognize the fact, as highlighted, I think, also by the Honorable Acting Chief Justice and also Mr. Lim, that in the area of family law, we think there's a lot of scope for mediation, in particular in property matters, custody matters, and of course in terms of maintenance, where through mediation I think we can get a lot of resolution as opposed to people actually fighting it all in the court, which generally is not very good for the people who tend to be the victims of protracted litigation in these matters, which are the children. I think the other point very quickly, mental health, I wanted to highlight that. As you know that prior to the last immediate past review we did at the UPR, Universal Periodic Review, we gave an undertaking that we will be calling a repertoire or special repertoire every year to Fiji. And we have actually timed it in such a manner that they come around the Aiyaz conference. So you actually have the benefit of listening to these special repertoires. We have experience in many other countries, and of course we don't have to pay for the airfares, they pay their own, and we get them to come and speak at the Aiyaz conference, which is great. But I think we recognize the fact that mental health is very, very important. And in Fiji it has been a very kind of stigmatized area of health, and indeed many people did not actually even consider it to be a health issue per se, which our understanding generally has been health. It pertains to your physiological output, well-being. But it is also interesting, there are two aspects that came out of it. We had a meeting with the Special Rapporteur, a formal debriefing meeting on Thursday. The couple of things that he did highlight, one of them was they discovered that the inability of doctors in Fiji to give sound or spend sound time and advice to their patients. There's a kind of very paternalistic approach. And one of the common feedback that we do get, a lot of Fijians who travel offshore, perhaps go to countries like Australia and New Zealand, they'll come back and say, it was really good because the doctor actually sat down and explained to me what's actually going inside me, what's happening, why is this medicine supposed to be taken, etc. Whereas the attitude perhaps in Fiji, by some, not all of them, some doctors are very good too, is, you take this because I'm the doctor, you don't need to know any more, this is it. And that is something that he's highlighted in his report, and we hope, and we use these reports to actually help improve, processes, the way that we deal with patients and clients within Fiji too. The last point that I also wanted to make was the fact that, counselors, there's a shortage of counselors. Just another small anecdote. As you know that we started about 3-4 years ago, every year we have budget consultations. Last year we had it online. But in the years prior to that, we used to go to every single town and get all the schools in that area to send at least 10 or 15 reps from their school to come to have a public forum or consultations regarding the budget. And we talk about the economy, and we allow them to also give their input, what they think they should be in the budget. And there was, I remember this was at Suva Grammar School, there's something like about 300 students from all of the different schools in the Suva region. And there's one very articulate young lady who stood up, I think she was year 13, I forget which school she was from, and she very passionately talked about the fact that how they have so many issues and they don't have anybody to talk to, and how they must have professional student counselors. They said, we don't want our teachers to be doubling up as counselors. We want professional counselors. And when she finished speaking, everybody in that hall started clapping and cheering. I said, I completely agree with you. And I said, there's a shortage of good professional counselors. And then I asked him a very simple question. I said, how many of you would like to pursue a career as a counselor? How many of you want to leave high school and go to university and study counseling? Not a single student put up their hand. I mean, how many of you as parents have said to your children, if they're good listeners, etc., I really think you should pursue counseling as a career? That attitude is not there too. So we have to be able to understand our limitations, how we can actually push ourselves to be able to get professional services in that area. Data protection, of course, and right to privacy is a big issue. What is really interesting is that, I recently I went online and I read a lot of newspapers from overseas, and there's one particular very good Middle Eastern newspaper that comes out from Israel. And so, they do entice you with the articles you can read for free, and after you get kind of hooked onto it, you need to read those articles every day, or every, twice in a day. And so now they want me to pay for it. They want me to pay for it, which is fine. And then suddenly the screen flashes up. My name is filled out, and the last 3 digits of my credit card is also filled out. I did not give it to them. But obviously they would have picked it up, because I know I have Uber. When I go overseas, I use Uber, and you have to fill in that. That information could have been shared. It's a very personal property of mine. But they had my last 3 digits of my credit card. I was nearly bowled over. So I have not subscribed. But my point being is that so many times we as consumers are quite happy when you sign up or you have an app. If you want download the Baby Shark song, you want to go into that, of young kids, they ask you to give all sorts of information about you. Everything about you. And they follow you, they track you. Even some of them apps, they ask you to share your photographs. And people very readily keep on clicking, yes, 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 agree, agree, agree. When we launched the Wailesi app, and we asked people to simply fill out, your name details, or if you wanted to use the free internet or Wi-Fi that we provide in Sukuna Park and various other places in Lautoka and Nandi, etc., people said, government is going to get your information. Government is getting your information to track you down. I can assure you we don't have any ability like the corporations have to be able to track you down. The Vodafone, of course, highlighted they also know how your emotions go, because you actually tell them whether you're feeling happy or sad or angry or loving. So I think there is we need to be able to sort of juxtapose these issues that's there. There's no easy solution, but of course, as you know, many countries are sort of reacting to it. Germany, as you know, has some fairly far-reaching pieces of legislation in place. I understand one of the panelists also said that New Zealand was considering that. And again, I think the discussions also centered around, we have a fairly, I think, pedestrian, frankly, approach to when we discuss right to privacy, freedom of expression, ability to express yourself, through the internet, etc. It's a very rudimentary approach. It's not a very sophisticated approach. And these sessions is there to help you try and understand what are the rules and regulations and laws that are there. What are the paradoxes that actually do exist? Because you yourself are actually contributing to this area of creating no privacy for yourself. And as the director of human rights talked about, the commodification of your personal information. You'd be surprised, those of you who have smartphones, how many people know your backgrounds. Some of them don't even work without you putting in your location. They know even where you are and where you're moving to. This is better than what most sovereign states can actually do. So I think there needs to be that understanding of it. I think there's one thing that I also wanted to highlight. As you know, in the Constitution, and I think Valerie would have highlighted this, the right to privacy, Section 24, and of course access to information, the ability to correct information that's pertaining to you. We were thinking that, you know, the Online Safety Commission, we have that, and frankly, I think the Online Safety Commission can do a lot more than what it's currently doing. It's very much empty from that space. But also the issue about the Privacy Commissioner. And we have some thought process around this, and of course it needs to be, you know, elucidated further, discussed further, more consultations, whether we can actually have a Online Safety Commissioner together with a, you know, a Privacy Commissioner together, because there are many issues. As you know, there's I may have highlighted this last year. There's one particular incident where we had this lady where somebody put a camera, this is in Lautoka, put a camera in her room, as you would do. You would change your clothes, you would dry yourself when you're coming out of the bathroom, and her images were being live streamed. That's a fact. And that's one of the reasons why we had introduced this Online Safety Commission. And fundamentally, if you look at the wordings of that particular statute, that particular law, it's centered around that. And we've had numerous incidents. Just 3-4 days ago, I've had people texting me about saying, my boyfriend has put up images of me, which we took at that point in time, but I did not consent to it being going up now. We just broke up 3 months ago. These are, of course, issues that did not happen when we were kids. And as I've said to many people, you know, thank God they did not have phones in our time. I'm sure many of the people in my generation would also relate to this. Thank God there was no kind of phone. So you can understand the pressures on our youth, the pressures on the young people now. It's a different kind of pressure. The other issue, of course, is some of you have your own businesses. We've seen very common, some of the HR departments of some of the organizations, most common place of leaks of your information. When you're sick, you maybe got sick because you had, you know, some personal issue, medical problem, and your doctor gave the certificate which you gave to the HR department, and next thing you know, half the firm knows about it. What kind of systems you've built in your organizations. Very quickly, it is very interesting, one point that I wanted to make is, you know, we have the one particular bill before Parliament, which is the Registration of Sexual Offenders Bill. Now, as you know, in most sexual assault cases, you have the ability to suppress the names of the parties, you know, A versus B. So there is a bit of a paradox now, because we want B or A, who may be the person who's been actually charged, prosecuted, convicted, and has served a jail sentence now. We still want generally it's a his name to be known to certain parties even after he has been released from prison. Many countries do that. So it's a weighing of public safety versus the ability of the public to know, of course, his name, but on the other hand, it's his right to privacy too. So your ability to protect his privacy. So that information should only be made available to where you may have what you call, you know, weak points, schools, in any other place where perhaps that kind of offense could readily take place or people could re-offend. So these are not necessarily easy issues, but again, these are sort of balancing of rights. That's what it's all about. It's about the balancing of rights. Nothing is so clinically one way or the other. I think the other issue that I wanted to highlight that about the registration, the online, the services in the court system. We, of course, one point I wanted to make, somebody had raised, there are people, for example, who don't know how to use computers, perhaps. There are people who may not have access to smartphones. Somebody said they don't even know how to use an analog phone. I think there's somebody in that corner there. But the point of the matter is, as we've rolled out e-services, as you see in the company's registration office here, we also have Government Services Center, and as highlighted by Mr. Lim, you know, some of the areas, lawyers themselves don't use computers in Singapore or don't want to do it. or the clients who want to file their own applications, they can go to these service centers. So we will, and I'm sure the court system will be able to provide those services centers. The last point I want to make on that, though, Acting Chief Justice, and to all of you, digitalization is not the only answer. You may have a particular process now, you can digitalize it, but the actual process itself may be very bureaucratic. Recently, we had a number of agencies get together and look at the way that we approve building permits. And without digitalization, just looking at all the processes, all the requirements of these, I think 11 or 13 agencies, they were able to reduce the processing time by 40%, even before digitalization. So before you digitalize, you need to look at your internal processes. So there may be certain things that the court, is requiring you to do that you probably don't need to do. There may be certain information that you need to fill out every time. The court may need to have your profile, and all you simply do is you put a profile number, you know that it's lawyer XYZ. Don't need to fill it out all the time. Don't need to do the back sheet that you do. All those types of things. So we have to understand, and you please, I would urge, and I'm sure that the Acting Chief Justice and his team would be consulting the legal fraternity, please contribute in a very positive manner as to how they can improve that. Need for Speed, of course, is very interesting, but of course, as has been highlighted by Dr. Biribo, he's got people now coming to him because they have used it in other countries. As it becomes more commonly available as a remedy or as a form of reducing one's pain, etc., they will expect it to be given to them in Fiji too. Now, we have, of course, a very shallow understanding of marijuana, because everybody thinks that, marijuana means you can, you smoke it and you get high. There are certain types of marijuana, as the doctor highlighted, depending on the content of THC. Some of them have very low levels of THC. You can smoke an entire field of marijuana, you won't get high. But it's actually used for the purpose of making paper. Some countries make it into fabric. But, I mean, that's a sort of side comment. But I think essentially, we wanted to discuss this because there is a growing demand for it. And many people, have argued that perhaps, the Harrison Act came into place because of the inability to actually tax marijuana. You could actually, it's very easy to tax, breweries. Of course, most of the drugs, or a lot of the drugs you have actually has opium in it. Victoria grows opium, so does Tasmania grow opium in a regulated fashion. Many of the bases that you have, Coca-Cola started from using coca from South America. Those of you who don't know that. They used to put it in the drinks. That's where the name comes from. So I think, and as you know, that many civilizations have used that. So we need to kind of demystify and perhaps understand that a lot more in the ability to deal with it. I remember post-1987, the then government had put in place a law where there was mandatory sentencing for even being caught with a little bit of marijuana in your possession. Mandatory 3 months. I remember I was working in the DPP's office. Most of the people who were prosecuted were between the ages of 17 and 23, and most of them came from low-income families. They did not have the cars to drive around, smoke it, or have their own bedroom. They would smoke behind the coconut tree or behind the toilet block or whatever. They are the ones who got caught. Some of them were in university, some of them in, at that time, Derrick Technical Institute, what is now FNU. Some of them got raped in prison. Completely changed their lives. So of course, thankfully, that mandatory sentencing was removed. So our ability to understand these type of social issues is very critically important to ensure that we, on the same page with what's happening with the rest of the world. So ladies and gentlemen, I please would ask you to once again put your hands together for the fantastic panelists we had. I'm sure you agree with that. And I very sincerely thank them for it. As you know, some of them have just come just for the day or 2 days. And we have a very, we had a very good lineup of panelists. And the Aiyaz conference, we don't get any budget funding from government's annual budget allocation. It's been a fund that was set up a number of years ago, and it's self-paying. So please, keep on coming to these things. keep on paying some slightly higher rates as the years go by, so we can keep on having money in the pot. This year, of course, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, is the 21 years of it. And none of this is possible. I just met, I think it was Siddharth Nandan in the Loo. And he said, oh, very, very well organized conference. I said, yes, it's only because of the fantastic team of people we actually have behind the scenes. And they've done a fantastic job. And those of you who are coming to this conference for the first time, we have a tradition where we call up all of the staff, the legal staff and also the staff that support them to come up on the stage and receive a small token of our appreciation. And I would like to call the Acting Chief Justice, please, if you could come forward to be able to give them the small gifts that we have for them. Next one is Lavania Wangani Buroto Kula. Suleti Balakiwai. Anaseni Wangani Liva. Olivia Vatumbua. Sarita Devi. Deepak Singh. Tundrau Wangalala. Siddharth Prasad. Vimal Ram. Matayasi Dambea. Shefa Sugunivalu. Nimitesh Kumar. Abhishek Singh. Sakyusa Vulavo. Prakash Rao. Prakash not here. Prashant Chandra. Ronil Deo. Shalvin Sharma. Medani Saurara. Felipe Tiritambua. Ronald Singh. You keep the short guys at the last. Has been the head of the Secretariat for the organizing committee of this Aiyaz conference for the past 14 years, and in fact has been part of the Secretariat team for the past 17 years. So she only had 4 years to make the 21. Please welcome my PA, Unesi Modei Suba.